Guys, how's it going? Today we're going to talk about cells, specifically the differences and similarities between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Now, the air conditioner is a little bit loud in the background, and occasionally these doors beep for security. We're just going to ignore that and get on into the lecture today. So, first of all, what is a cell? Okay, so a cell is the basic unit of all living things. It's considered the basic unit of life because it is the smallest unit that's capable of carrying out life's processes. By that, I mean things like reproduction, metabolism, things like that. You might have thought that an atom is the smallest thing. An atom is a very small thing, right? But cells are the smallest unit that are capable of exhibiting all of life's properties. That's why a cell is the basic, smallest unit of life. So, in our organisms, we can have unicellular or multicellular varieties. If you are unicellular, you only are one little tiny cell. So, this is like a bacteria, an amoeba, a lot of different protists. Like a unicycle is one wheel, this is one cell, unicellular. Okay, and alternatively, you can be multicellular, and multicellular organisms have multiple or many cells. So things that you can see with the naked eye, your bare eye without a microscope, those things are multicellular. Plants, animals, a lot of fungi, things like that, you can see them. So an organism can be unicellular or it can be multicellular. So there's two main types of cells, and we've been talking about this in class. But the two main types of cells are prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. So everything that's alive and made of cells contains one of these cell types. There's no other types. It's either a prokaryote or it's a eukaryote. And the word prokaryotic literally means before the nucleus. Technically before the kernel, but they're referring to the nucleus as the kernel. Okay, so pro means before, and karyotic is referring to the nucleus. For eukaryotic organisms, U means true. So this contains a true nucleus or a true kernel. Okay? We're going to talk about Robert Hooke. A very long time ago, 1665, he observed cork cells under like the first makeshift microscope. Okay, so here is his drawing when he was observing cork cells. Now, cork is a plant. And as you can see, it's very compact in the brick-like structures that we're used to seeing associated with plants. And he called these little cells because they reminded him of prison cells, how it was very like blocked together, like little rooms all next to each other. That's what he thought they looked like, so he called them cells. Today, we still use that terminology. The cell is the basic unit of life. So he kind of led the way for the discovery of the cell theory. Okay, the cell theory was a combination of a whole lot of scientists working together, but it has three major components. That cells are the basic unit of life. So like I said, they are the smallest unit capable of carrying out life's processes. Cells are the basic unit of life. All living things, all organisms are made of cells. So from the smallest little bacteria up to the largest mammals on the planet, they're all made of cells. And lastly, new cells are produced from existing cells. So in other words, cells come from cells. This just means that cells don't rain down from the sky. They don't appear out of thin air. They come from other living things. This makes sense. Through reproduction, cells come from other cells. So as I said, there are two main types of cells. So we're going to talk about the discovery of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Those are the two main classes. Prokaryotic, we talked about how it literally means before the nucleus. These were the first primitive cells to evolve. These were the very first simple little organisms. As you can see, there's a picture here of a prokaryotic cell. It's very simple, okay? This is just a little oval shape. It's got a few things floating around in it. Most likely those are ribosomes, okay? And then it has free floating DNA because it doesn't have a nucleus. It literally means before the nucleus. So if it came before, then it can't have a nucleus, right? So prokaryotic is before nucleus. They are the first primitive cells. And as I said, they don't have a nucleus. So eukaryotic means true nucleus. We just talked about that. So as you can see from this little green guy over here, we have a defined nucleus, and now we also have something called membrane-bound organelles. This means that these organelles contain membranes around the outside of them. So eukaryotic cells evolved after prokaryotic cells. The theory is something called endosymbiosis. which means living in harmony, one inside the other, essentially. Okay, so the theory is that one prokaryotic cell wrapped around and ate another prokaryotic cell, and that's how we got the first primitive eukaryotic cells. That's why all of these organelles have a membrane inside of them. So first to evolve was prokaryotic because it means before the nucleus, and second to evolve is a eukaryotic cell because it came after our prokaryotes, because supposedly they have engulfed each other, they've eaten each other and become living together here. That's where we have all these membrane-bound organelles coming from. That is eukaryotic, so they came later. So let's talk a little bit more about eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotes all have a nucleus with a nuclear envelope. This just means that there is a membrane around the outside of the nucleus. They are much larger and very much more complex than prokaryotes. As you can see in the image here, we have a lot of things going on, and this isn't even all of the organelles that are inside. Okay, next we have membrane-bound organelles, as I was saying before. So we have the Golgi body, we have the endoplasmic reticulum, we have lysosomes, we have vacuoles, we have a nucleus. Okay, there's a lot of things going on inside of our eukaryotic cells. Okay, that's only a couple of the different organelles. And as you can see here, like I said, that's only a couple of the different organelles that are inside of eukaryotic cells. But remember that each one of these organelles has a membrane around it. These are membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so that's basically in order to separate that organelle from everything else inside the cell. If you think about your body has a lot of organs in it, right? And your organs make up your organ systems, which make up an organism. So if you think about this on a really, really small scale, our eukaryotes have organelles inside of them. And these organelles kind of act like our organs, that each one has a different job in order to keep the cell functioning correctly. That's exactly the same thing as our organs. They're all functioning to keep us they're all working to keep us functioning correctly, right? That's exactly what's going on, just on a very, very small microscopic scale. Okay, eukaryotes also have DNA. It is double-stranded and it forms chromosomes. It is highly organized. Our eukaryotes can be unicellular from our little protists all the way up to multicellular organisms that can be very, very large mammals, very, very large trees. Okay, for example, our eukaryotes are animals, plants, fungi, and protists. So those are our 4 different organisms that fall under the category of eukaryotes. Here's some images. We have a plant and an animal cell to compare here. So if you think about eukaryotic cells, you have a brain, your cells have a brain. It's called the nucleus. Okay, so if you look at the comparison here, we have the plant on the left and we have the animal on the right. So you can see that our plant cell has slightly different structures. You can see that it has a cell wall. You can see these things called chloroplasts inside. And you can see that the shape overall is different. It's a little bit more rigid in shape, and that's to help plants stand up, right? Our animal cells are more spherical. They're more like circles if you were to draw them on a piece of paper. But you'll notice some similarities. Like I said, you'll notice that they both have a nucleus. They both have a cell membrane. They have ribosomes. They have mitochondria. Okay, so you can look at the pictures here and see some similarities between our plant and animal cells. And remember, both of these are eukaryotic cells. They have a true nucleus. As you can see, it's the large sphere in the middle of the cells. They both have a nucleus. They both have membrane-bound organelles. They're larger cells. So you can take a second to pause this and look at some of the similarities and differences between plant and animal cells. Next, we have this large chart that is the eukaryotic structures in plants and animal cells. It has the name of the organelle, it has the description for you, and then the function, what it actually does. I'm not going to go through and read every single one of these to you because you guys are completely capable of reading, but if you'd like to pause and just take a second to remind yourself of some of the major organelles inside of eukaryotic cells, this is a place for you to do that. So we do have some differences between plant and animal cells. They're still both eukaryotic, but we do have some similarities and some differences between them. So here we'll start off with some differences. So only plant cells, they're eukaryotic, but only plant cells have the cell wall around the outside to give them more structure. It's a firm wall around the outside of the cell membrane. They have chloroplasts And chloroplasts contain a pigment that usually makes plants green. And that's where photosynthesis happens. You know that we as animals do not do photosynthesis, but plants do photosynthesis. That's how they make their own food. And chloroplast is where that magic happens. They also have a large central vacuole. And that large central vacuole fills up with water, and that's what allows plants to stand up straight. If you've ever seen like your mom get a bouquet of flowers or you get a bouquet of flowers and they start to droop sometimes, okay, the water or the stems need to be cut. So then the water needs to be replaced, or the stems need to be cut so then they can get more water into their large central vacuoles. You'll also notice that, like, I live in Texas, it's extremely hot during the summers. When plants start to wilt, they need more water to be able to stand up correctly. That's called turgor pressure, because that large central vacuole soaks up as much water as it can to where it's kind of like a really full water balloon, right? That it's very rigid. So now it's going to stand up straight. That's turgor pressure, and that's all because of the water storage in the large central vacuole. So those are some unique characteristics of plants. Animals do not have those things, but animals do have other things that are special to them. So only animal cells have lysosomes and centrioles. So lysosomes are for waste removal. You can kind of think of them like little trash cans. So they will go around and collect waste in the cell and then dispose of it. And then centrioles are used for cellular division in animal cells. There's a similar process that occurs in plant cells, but we'll get to those details later when we get into cell reproduction. So here's some images of eukaryotic cells. You can see that there's a lot of things going on inside of the cells. Here you can see a paramecium. You can see that we have an animal cell that's blue up in the top. You can see that we have a plant cell that's green. Okay, you can see that we have a cell wall in the plant cell. You can see we have a cell membrane in every single one of these cells because every single cell has a cell membrane. Okay, you can see the nucleus. And if you want to take a second to pause this and look at the other similarities, you can feel free to do that now. Okay, so next we're going to talk about prokaryotic cells. So remember that prokaryotes evolved first. They do not have a nucleus because the word literally means before the nucleus. So they have no nucleus and no membrane-bound organelles. They just have ribosomes, and ribosomes are technically subunits. They're not membrane-bound, and some people consider them organelles, some people don't, because technically they are subunits. Okay? All prokaryotes are unicellular. This means that all prokaryotic organisms are only made of one single cell. They are much smaller than eukaryotic cells, and they are much simpler than eukaryotic cells. This makes sense. If they're really, really small, there's not a lot of room inside of them for all of the crazy organelles and functionalities that come with that, as we have in our larger counterparts, the eukaryotic organisms. Okay, so prokaryotes are very, very small and very, very simple. They do have DNA, and it is in a more circular shape, and it occurs in the middle of our prokaryote. It's kind of floating around in the middle. It's not encased in a membrane called the nucleus the way it is inside of a eukaryotic organism. It's still there, but it's just kind of floating around the middle. And all prokaryotes are bacteria. So when we're talking about the types of organisms here, it's just bacteria. Remember when we just talked about eukaryotes, we talked about plants, we talked about animals, fungi, and protists. But prokaryotes are literally just bacteria, and not all bacteria are bad. There's a whole lot of them that are very good for us, okay? So don't give them a bad name for that. But prokaryotes are bacteria. Here's some images. These all happen to have flagella, which is like the tails that's coming off of them. Not all bacteria have that, but many of the images that you find on the internet do have flagella. You can see here that there's a lot of like empty space in the cytoplasm. You can see that we have the bacterial DNA that's floating around the middle, okay? And occasionally you'll see pictured ribosomes as well. So in class, we talked about this PB no-no. PB no-no. Okay, that's going to help you remember the important things about bacteria and prokaryotic cells. So it stands for prokaryotic, bacteria, no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so that's a little, hack for you to remember all of the things you need to know about prokaryotes. Because if it's not describing a prokaryote, it's probably describing a eukaryote. So now for some similarities. We compared and contrast, we did the differences. Now let's talk about what's similar between prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. So one, they all contain 4 biomolecules, and the biomolecules are lipids, carbs, proteins, and nucleic acids. Biomolecules means life molecules. You know, we're talking about cells, and cells are the basic unit of life. So it makes sense that they would contain all 4 of the living molecules, biomolecules. They both have ribosomes. They both have DNA. They both have cytoplasm, which is just kind of that jelly stuff that's around all the organelles in the middle of the cell. They can be unicellular, but remember that eukaryotes can also be multicellular. And they all have a cell membrane. Okay? They all have a cell membrane. Now remember that the cell wall is in plants. Okay? But they all have a cell membrane. Every single cell has a membrane around it. But our plants have a cell wall. Okay? Don't forget that they have both in plants. I put that on here just to remind you of that. So here's an image directly comparing the eukaryotic cell structure to the prokaryotic cell structure. You can see at the top eukaryotes, and down at the bottom you've got your prokaryote. So again, you can see that they are much more complex. There's more going on inside. The shapes are a little bit different. And then you can see at the bottom that we have our prokaryote. There's free-floating DNA that is not inside of a nucleus. Okay, and it doesn't really have a lot of organelles going on. Like I said, it has ribosomes, which are technically subunits. And remember that all cells have a cell membrane, as I was just talking about. Yes, other organisms aside from animals can have a cell wall. Yes, absolutely. But they still have a cell membrane inside of that cell wall. So the cell membrane is also known as the plasma membrane. It's also known as the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, all of those words mean the same thing, just like ninth grade and freshman means the same thing. A phospholipid bilayer is 2 layers, bi means 2 layers of phospholipids. And that's the major component of your membrane. We're going to get into a whole lot about membrane and how things are moving in and out of the cell, but I just wanted to refresh your memory on this. And the phospholipids have a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic region. This is a water-loving and a water-fearing region to the molecules. The cell membrane contains cholesterol to help maintain fluidity of the membrane, which means that it maintains its flexibility. And the cell membrane contains proteins for nutrient transport, which we'll talk about in our next unit. And it contains carbohydrates for cell recognition. This is how cells can start off. It's a start of cell communication, how cells can identify one another. This is an image of the phospholipid bilayer, an image of the cell membrane. This is a cross section of it. As you can see, there's a lot going on here, but this is common in every single cell. They all have phospholipid bilayers, whether it's eukaryotic or prokaryotic. So it surrounds every single cell. It's selectively permeable, which means that it controls what comes in and what goes out. And there are 2 main types of transport called passive and active that we're going to get into, like I said, in our next unit. So you're asking me, we've talked about bacteria, we've talked about animals, we've talked about plants, fungi, protists, eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Okay, but we're hearing a lot about a virus, especially in today's day and age. What is a virus? I thought a virus was small. I thought a virus was bad. I thought a virus was alive. Well, they are in fact not alive. They are not cells. So a virus is neither of the cell types that we've been talking about because it's not a cell. It does not have a membrane. It is not a cell. They are not alive. A virus is a special protein and DNA subunit that attacks living cells, right? And it takes over the machinery, and that's how it's able to replicate, by using host cells. So a virus can't do anything unless it gets into a host cell and starts to use that living cell to do its bidding. So I like to think about viruses as just DNA in a pretty package. It's just a protein and some DNA. It's not alive. It is not a cell. So please don't make that confusion. We will get a whole new unit on viruses later this semester. Okay, so I wanted to call your attention to one similarity between prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells, and viruses, which remember are not cells. In this middle portion right here, they have one thing in common. Do you know what it is? They all contain DNA. Sometimes viruses have RNA, but they all contain DNA. That's what you would put in this little section of our Venn diagram. They all contain DNA. That is the only similarity between our cells that are living and viruses that are not living. So this is where your notes stop, but I'm going to go into a question and answer couple of slides here just to help test your knowledge. If you want to stop here, totally fine. I'll see you in the next one. If you want to review some of these slides with me, I'm going to go ahead and go through those now. What type of cell is this and how do you know? Well, when I look at this, I see the label of cell wall. I see that it's green. I see large central vacuoles, and I see chloroplasts. I know that this is a plant cell. What type of cell is this? How do you know? When I look at this, I see something that does not look like a cell. I see something that says DNA, and this kind of looks like a cookie robot, from Despicable Me. Looks like a little cookie robot. This is a virus. It is not a cell. And I know this because it doesn't have a membrane or any of the organelles that we've been talking about. What type of cell is this? How do you know? When I look at this, I see kind of an ovally shape. I see that we have a nucleoid region, which is just kind of scattered DNA. I see that we have ribosomes, but I don't see a nucleus or anything like that. So I think this is a bacterial cell or a prokaryotic cell because it's lacking the things I was just talking about. Which organelles are specific to plants? Do you remember what they were? We have a large central vacuole, cell wall, chloroplasts. There we go. Which organelles are specific to animals? There's two of them. Do you remember what they are? It's lysosomes that are used for waste removal and centrioles, which are used in cell division. Why are viruses considered abiotic? Let's break down that word. A means against, bio means life. They are considered not to be alive. They are not alive. Why are viruses considered not alive? Viruses are not alive because they are not cells, and only cells make up living things. Viruses are smaller than that. They contain protein, and they contain DNA. They require a host, and they are not alive. What characteristics do viruses share with cells? Viruses that are not alive and cells like prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells that are alive all have DNA in common. All of them have DNA or some kind of genetic material. What does PB no mean? It means prokaryotic bacteria, no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. That's important, membrane-bound organelles, because remember that they still have the cell membrane, they still have cytoplasm, and they still have ribosomes, which are still technically subunits. Which cells contain nuclei? That's our eukaryotic cells, because eukaryotic means true nucleus. Plants, animals, fungi, and protists, all eukaryotes. What characteristics do all cells have in common? Do you remember? All cells have our biomolecules. All cells contain DNA. All cells have a cell membrane. All cells contain cytoplasm. And all cells have the capability of being unicellular. But remember, all prokaryotes are unicellular, and some eukaryotes are unicellular. What does letter F represent? Letter F. This, to me, looks like a plant cell. 1, it's green. 2, it's got an interesting, more rectangular shape. It has a large central vacuole and a nucleus. So what on earth could those little things labeled F be? There are chloroplasts. What does letter E represent? Letter E, to me, looks kind of like a little bean with a squiggle in the middle. Okay, that is our mitochondria. That's the powerhouse of the cell because it creates energy for the cell. And that brings us to the end of our cell review. I hope this was helpful. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.